The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily express those of W Rock Radio and its sponsors. All shows are independently owned and broadcast for entertainment purposes only. Readers and listeners are advised that neither W Rock Radio nor its owners and agents shall be held liable for the content of programs. Website content and any audio produced and streamed by W Rock Radio is protected copyright and may not be recorded, rebroadcast, redistributed, or reused without express written permission from W Rock Radio.
2, 3, 4.
Sometimes we need to slow it down. Take a look around and breathe. 'Cause these times go by so very fast. Moments never last. Just breathe. Breathe in, breathe out. Quiet, be still, don't shout. Love is what it's all about. Breathe. Sometimes when you feel you've had enough, living is just too tough. Just breathe. 'Cause you'll regret when these days are past. Your friend just seen your last. Just breathe. Breathe in, breathe out. Quiet, be still, don't shout. Love is what it's all about. Just breathe. Breathe in, breathe out. Love is what it's all about. Be quiet, be still, don't shout. Just breathe. Just love. Just love. Just love.
Good day, good evening, wherever you're at in the world, whatever time it is. Welcome to the Just Love Show. Thank you so much for joining me again. Truly blessed to have you taking part in the show. Thank you for taking time out of your day to listen to me ramble for a little while. Like we do every show, sit back and take a deep breath. Think about the abundance in your life. I know that I sometimes sound like a broken record on this, but this show is about us moving from a place of scarcity to a place of appreciating the abundance in our life. And also, probably like you get tired of me doing on more than one show, I'm going to be talking this evening about cannabis with another passionate cannabis end of prohibition expert, end of the illegality, the demonization of the plant, and talk about how this plant truly embodies abundance in every conceivable way, which I know I've talked about before with I guess like Dale Sky Jones from Oaksterdam, Paul von Hartman, the author of Cannabis versus Climate Change, and on and on and on. But there's been 70 years of anti-propaganda against this plant, despite having a 50,000-year history, shared history of us connecting with it physically. We have an endocannabinoid system throughout our body that has been truly depleted for the last 70 years, a planet that's been depleted of all the goodness that this plant brings. So I'm doing my best to try to undo the brainwashing that's taken place. And I understand and empathize entirely with those of you out there who say, really, you just like to get high, or yeah, whatever, that's what a stoner would say. But that wasn't my journey. I didn't 6 years ago when I started to put the show Weed Country together for Discovery. It wasn't my opinion at all. I was like, are we still making a big deal about this little plant that my dad grew in our basement? I thought we settled here in California with Prohibition 215 20 years ago. 15 years ago at that time, it hadn't been. And as I got more involved, I'm like, no, this isn't just something that if you smoke some a chemo patient, well, they're not going to feel quite as nauseous, they're going to get the munchies. That's a good thing. Or a friend of mine who likes to smoke, maybe they're not going to go to jail. Those are good things. Nobody should go to jail for this plant. That was about the extent of my relationship and understanding of the plant. As I've probably shared on the show before as well. Then as I was putting Weed Country together, I did 6 hours of interviews with senior citizens. People who had never had any relationship to the plant at all. One woman in particular named Sue Frances Taylor was a Catholic high school principal at 2 different Oakland high schools in her 50s and would have had her sons thrown in jail, her own words, if she'd caught them using marijuana. She became bedridden through a back injury in her 50s, was on 9 different pharmaceuticals, had no quality of life with her grandkids, her children, couldn't work. Her son started to talk more and more about medical marijuana. She's now in her late 60s, uses a little tincture under her tongue. After she gets done parasailing, yes, parasailing, I've even had the pleasure of dancing with her, and she can cut a rug. She's now the senior advocate for the city of Oakland, senior advocate for Harborside, which is the largest medical marijuana dispensary in the world, and the only person authorized by the state to go and speak to senior citizens about cannabis being an alternative to pharmaceuticals. So I was like, wow, from a medicinal standpoint, this is the real deal. And I learned more and more about the ailments that it can actually treat, and actually had gotten relief from back pain and other things in my own life. But then I learned about all of its uses in the form of the hemp plant, which again is just another species of the cannabis plant, which has been used for, well, the original cultivation started 15,000 years ago in India. But in 1938, Popular Mechanics put out an article. In fact, rather than go into this, I'm going to read you a little thing, and then I'm going to bring on my guest, and we'll talk about all this. So, as I do every show, read a little something that I've written that I think fits with the show today. And I think this is apropos. What supposedly sets the human species apart from all other is their much vaunted awareness of self. But other than spending much time and effort examining and explaining the reflection, they do not seem to understand that what makes this awareness of such great and unique value is that they alone have within their grasp the ability to make the conscious choice as to whether they thrive, giving in love, or become extinct, hoarding in fear. As most, if not all, other species, evolution or lack thereof is random luck of the draw. With some organically working together like ants that all may succeed, while others become parasitic or cannibalistic, devouring themselves into no longer being like, say, man. And then this is a quote from one of my favorite Buddhists, Thich Nhat Hanh. We are here to awaken from the illusion of our separateness. Before I bring on my guest, and again, he's a tremendously knowledgeable person on all things cannabis and is doing tremendous work out in the world, spreading the good news, if you will, of cannabis. I want to read some quotes to you real quick. And then we're gonna do a little multiple choice here. I'm going to give you 3 names and you can contemplate for a second, and then I'll tell you who said it. So, if we could see clearly the miracle of a single flower clearly, our whole life would change. Okay, who said that? Jeff Spicoli, Cheech and Chong, or Buddha? That would be Buddha. Make the most you can of the Indian hemp seed and sow it everywhere. Again, Cheech, Chong, Jeff Spicoli, or George Washington? That would be George Washington. Hemp is of the first necessity to the wealth and protection of the country. Jeff Spicoli, Cheech and Chong, or Thomas Jefferson? Thomas Jefferson. And then let's pick one more. Or maybe we'll pick 2 more. Let's see. Why use up the forests, which were centuries in the making, and the mines, which required ages to lay down, if we can get the equivalent of forest and mineral products in the annual growth of the hemp fields? Cheech and Chong, Jeff Spicoli, or Henry Ford? That would be Henry Ford. And last, that I'll read pick for you today before we get to my guess, is the illegality of cannabis is outrageous, an impediment to the full utilization of a drug which helps produce a serenity, insight, and sensitivity and fellowship so desperately needed in this increasingly mad and dangerous world. Again, Cheech Chong, Jeff Spicoli, or Carl Sagan. The Jeopardy clock is ticking. Carl Sagan. So now to my guest for this evening. He's a new friend. I've just really connected with him in the past couple of days, but we have so much in common, and I'm really thrilled that he made a point of reaching out to me. His name is Robert Blount. I hope I pronounced that right. I didn't even ask. And he is the largest social media influencer in the field of cannabis. So without further ado, I'll bring him on. He can tell you everything he's doing, like work he's doing to establish hemp cultivation in Haiti, and on and on and on. He'll tell you all about all of his organizations, his tremendous history, how he got to where he is today. So without further ado, Robert, welcome to the Just Love Show.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be on, and I'm just really fired up to have the opportunity to share my experience so far, which, compared to a lot of other people in the industry, is extremely limited. I feel like I'm on a crash course learning about why this plant is in our lives. It's not for the reason it had been in my life growing up as a recreational mechanism. It's just so important. There's this the property to it that you had mentioned before in one of those quotes, where you can get so many different resources from a crop of this sustainable and at a sustainable basis. And I had researched.
I'm sure you got all the multiple choice answers right.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like the biomass. It's one. I'm not sure if it's the number one biomass producer on Earth, but I think it's almost there. Like it's like top 3 or something biomass producers on Earth. And it's just something that I can be really excited about. It's really kind of impact my life. I've been passionate about activism, about the environment, about personal freedom, and spreading awareness, and trying to cast the old systems that we cling to. Like the horse and buggy of society. That is, operating off of a scarcity that doesn't exist, and then using dirty energy and fake food products and stuff that's just it's not sustainable. So I was very passionate about that, which led me to cannabis as being not necessarily a silver bullet, but something that I could see as being useful for so many different things that the world needs right now.
Well, before we dig fully into the cannabis, because you and I have already gone on 2 hours before the show about it, I'd like everyone to know a little bit about who you are, where your roots are, and we'll start with there. Where was Robert born? Where's Robert's family from? Because you have a really interesting background.
Yeah, it's actually a really weird story, too, because, my father was born and raised in the South Bronx, off of Willis Street, South Bronx, and my mother's actually a Cuban immigrant. She came to the United States when she was 13. She immigrated and was adopted, lived in Florida for a little while, and then ended up meeting my father while they were both growing up in the Bronx. And it was really interesting because my father went on to his father. He's from a military family. My grandfather was in the Navy in World War II. My father joined the Air Force and then went on to work for the Department of Energy. This was during the Cold War, and it created an interesting situation with him and my mom, because he was really active and proactive with trying to get a hold of her family back in Cuba, because she was the only person who came to the States from Cuba. And there was an instance when he was getting this job at the Department of Energy, he was to have the highest civilian clearance, Q clearance. And they asked him, they said, "Hey, have you ever called any communist countries before?" And he told them, well, yeah, I was checking on my wife's family. I was trying to get in touch with them. And they had the transcript and everything. They handed him the transcript and said, yeah, you called from this number at this time, and there's the number that you called. This is how long you were on the phone. Good job. And it's just a weird story how, how they came together and started, a family. And of course, I have an older brother and an older sister. I was the third kind of unplanned surprise child who came into the mix. And of course, after working for the government, my dad got into chiropractic, which, by the way, now is something that he's really excited about integrating with cannabis medicine. But that's another conversation.
Quick question. I'm just completely different topic. I'm just kind of curious. How's your mom and your dad, for that matter, feel about the beginning of normalizing the relationships with Cuba?
My father's opinion on it, I believe, is kind of just, he sees it as something that's old. That's just kind of hanging around. My mother, is excited about it. She has an interesting situation with her family, though. They have really interesting family dynamics because one of my uncles, apparently back in Cuba, one of my uncles worked for the Castro government and had one of my other uncles thrown in jail. So her family is feuding. So I've actually approached her about getting in better touch with my family there in Cuba, and she's almost hesitant about it. She kind of drags her feet on it a little bit because that has to be resolved. And I could imagine going out there and meeting my cousins and say, hey, look, guys, let's
plant hemp.
Yeah, let's get something going really cool. And you know what? This fall, I am planning on going down and working in Haiti, as you mentioned, and going by Jamaica for the Rastafari Roots Fest. And I was really close to adding a Cuba leg to that, but I figured it's probably best to save that all for a trip all of its own. And go down there with a specific purpose of connecting with my family and then just seeing what kind of opportunities there are there. Because I had this notion when U.S.-Cuba relations improved that, well, now you can send money. That's one thing that's changed. You can send money to your family. Like I grew up in Texas, and a lot of my friends were sending money back to their family in Mexico. And that's something that Cuban Americans were never able to do for the longest time. And so that's changed. And then also, I think the way things are changing there, I almost feel like, there's no point in trying to bring them back. Why not go there and see what opportunities can be built up over there to boost that community and the economy out there. Of course, that comes down to government restrictions. And, like in Haiti, there is no illegality to farming hemp. We can grow it. The reason why we want to work with the government out there is so that we have a larger scale and faster progress as far as putting everything up and getting everything going. But yeah, definitely, there's a huge interest in me bringing my family into this. I've talked to my mother, and she's a very conservative upbringing, Roman Catholic upbringing, and explaining to her cannabis and my involvement in it was a step that I was putting off for a while. I was procrastinating on that, and I would just mention it in passing. Oh yeah, I'm doing some marketing. I'm doing a show. I'm at an event. Just really vague terms. And eventually, she got really curious. She's like, "What kind of companies? Who are your marketing companies? Who are your clients? Who are these people you're working with?" And I had the long conversation with her. Hey, here's the history. The conversation was actually really funny that I had with her because the first thing I said, I was like, well, there's this plant and there's an extract that comes from it. It heals a lot of people who have terminal diseases and all kinds of stuff. It's really good for them. It helps them out. She's like, well, that sounds great. And I said, well, that's a plant that you're familiar with, and you had mentioned that Dad liked it during the 70s, and you smelt it on his jacket one time. And she said, oh, okay, I know what you're talking about. And so, but I appealed immediately to her. She is, she's very intellectual. She has a very conservative upbringing, but she's also a very intellectual person. So I appealed to her intellect. I told her the story of it, the history, the testimonials that we get, especially working with Rick Simpson, where just testimonials are pouring in left and right. And I tell her about these people. And then eventually, she was like, well, it seems like one of these, another instance of the government saying that something wasn't in our interest when necessarily that wasn't the truth, and just government lies, et cetera, et cetera. She's not really hip on the recreational part of it either, but that's kind of digressing a bit. But yeah, they're across the board in my family. There's a buzz because of the way, Obama, mentioned that he was going to help Cuba relations. And I'm used to seeing presidents come in and out of office and say they're going to do stuff, and we know how all that works. But, I feel very fortunate for the opportunity to now maybe do more out there and get in touch with my family and see what we can build.
Well, it's funny. In the past 2 days, I obviously know of Rick Simpson. I know of the work he's done. I know of his oil, and I never had the pleasure of meeting Rick. But in the past 2 days, I've had two different people, entirely unrelated, come to me and talk about they're going to be making their own Rick Simpson oil, and now you've worked with Rick Simpson. Usually that means at some point I'm going to meet that person fairly soon. So that's kind of interesting. Another... you growing up in Texas, another person I know is really involved in cannabis way before our time, was a guy named Wild Bill Caldwell. And I was helping him, it started work to put together a film about his life. Wild Bill was, if you smoked weed in the late 70s, or I should say in the 70s or 80s, Bill was probably the guy that smuggled it into the country. And even in 73, because he grew up in Sulphur Springs, Texas, and wouldn't have had anything to do with cannabis at all until he got to college and his girlfriend turned him on to it. And next thing he knows, he's this massive cannabis smuggler working with all the major cartels. Eventually in, I want to say 87, he got caught on conspiracy, not for actually having the weed himself, but he got caught with a conspiracy in Tennessee for 5,000 pounds of weed. He got 2 consecutive life sentences.
Oh my God.
He eventually got out after 18 years.
Yeah.
And I took him to the Emerald Cup up in Sonoma, which is a great cup to go to. I love it. It's all outdoor, green, organic.
I've heard great things about it.
It's a really awesome event. I took him up there, dude. He was greeted like a hero after 18 years, and to see that something he'd believed in very strongly. Granted, he had a profit motive in, but still he was super passionate about the goodness of the plant. It was just the times he lived in, which were far more gray or far more black than they were gray, which still, we're trying to get people so they don't have to operate in that world.
Yeah.
But he started crying, and it was so amazing to see how because now keep in mind, he'd been in prison for 18 years, so cell phones, none of this existed when he went to jail, or at least wasn't the way it was, let alone Proposition 215, any of this. So this was the first time, all of a sudden, imagine going from a world where, you'd been in prison for 18 years for this plant to going, it's out in the open, everyone's hugging you, telling you you're a hero, you're not a villain, you're not a bad guy. Anyways, a really remarkable Texas tie-in there. But having said that, Texas is no joke still when it comes to weed. So at what point did you start getting involved with it?
Well, for me, cannabis was something that was there, to enjoy, hanging out with my friends. Every once in a while we'd have some. And growing up in Texas isn't like growing up in California or growing up on the East Coast. Dry times are dry times, and we are in full rationing mode around the clock here in Texas. No matter how many people have cannabis, we are experts at, I have this thing when I buy a new sack, I'll flick a bud here and there, just like into a random corner or on top of a shelf somewhere, because I know one day I'll run out, and then that'll be the breath of fresh air. Oh yeah, I remember I hid little nugs around the house. That's people from Texas do that. Nobody else does.
That's funny.
And, but I always had an appreciation for it. And then, of course, when I graduated high school and was waiting tables, it became more a part of my routine because I'd come home after waiting tables. I'd be frustrated from just dealing with people. And one hit later, I would forget the entire day and just be in a great mood, surfing the television channels or the web, and that was the extent of it. And of course, I became active in. I worked a little bit with Occupy San Antonio. I did an activist radio show, local activist radio show, or I co-hosted it for a while, and we were getting communication from one of Rick Simpson's colleagues. And he was saying, he would send us a message and say, yeah, cannabis cures cancer, Rick Simpson. Look up the Rick Simpson story, Run from the Cure.
Which I want to mention something on the cannabis cures cancer thing. This, folks, is something that they've known since 1972. When Nixon doubled down on the war on drugs, the culture war, because that's really what it's about, all of his advisors told him not to do it, that there wasn't a problem with the plan. And he said, basically, F you. I'm going to crush this counterculture movement, which meant the peace movement, the love movement, the anti-war movement, the reconnecting with nature movement. All of this, he, in his mind, embodied in this plan, which he was right to do so. But at that point in time, in 72, our government, which is now admitted, just in the past, 3 weeks, they knew that they've known all this time that it was a cure for cancer. And it's important that people understand one thing, and this is something my friend Paul von Hartmann, who I've had on the show, has mentioned before, author of the book Cannabis versus Climate Change. You don't hear, when you're watching TV and they talk about cancer, you never hear about cancer cure centers. You hear about cancer treatment centers. And the reason for this, along with war and everything else, is problems or profit. Cannabis is a solution to so many of our problems. True solution, not just treating the surface symptoms.
Yeah, exactly. And, I was, after a while, and I'm not going to say that I was super turned on to the message at first. It was only through the persistence of this guy that I actually really did kind of like veer away from some of the political stuff, anti-war, privacy, anti-central bank debt system kind of stuff like that, to kind of looking at, well, what is it all about? What is all this rage about cannabis and what else it does besides what I know, which was limited to, like you said. I figured, vomiting, appetite, sleep, pain, you smoke it, that's it. And I know that, and I had this expectation that medical marijuana was mostly people going in and say, oh yeah, I have a headache or blah, 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 give me some weed. But, through this guy's persistence, he just would not give up. He keeps sending me messages. And eventually I was like, okay, you know what? All right, fine. I'm gonna watch this thing. This guy just won't leave me alone. I'm going to check it out. So I watched Run from the Cure. By the time I was done watching it, I was like, wow, I am literally wasting all my time. That I'm not promoting this plant. I'm wasting my time. So I reached back out and I said, well, I'm doing a little local activist radio show. We don't really talk about cannabis, but we do talk about some alternative information. This seems like something that people would really jive with. Can I get Rick on the show? And we were fortunate enough to get Rick on. And at first it was an interview, a one-on-one interview with Rick and myself. And then we were able to arrange for him to come on the show live and have interactions with callers. People could call in and just ask him questions and have them answered. So we had people. So what we did is we started reaching out to every social media brand that we could, hoping that we could get our link to the show shared, get the word spread out so we can get more people to call in, more people to listen. And we were able to create this consortium, this network of cannabis brands, pro-cannabis message brands, and activist voices in social media, mostly Facebook, to kind of share the message and the broadcast. And of course, having him back on after that, as a repeat guest. And then we created kind of like a panel with Rick and Dr. Dina, because Dina had some experience helping bring medical cannabis into the Los Angeles area.
Yeah, you'd mentioned, could you give my audience a little background on her?
Yeah, Dina, she was recently featured on Vice in a series where they were mentioning figures who were actually based on, or characters who were based on people who had actually, real people who had journeys based on whatever that subject is. And of course, hers is the real Nancy Botwin, quote unquote, which is the character on Weeds. The main character who basically sells cannabis to get by to provide for herself and her family. And she just has this journey where she runs into the DEA and cartels and all this stuff. And it's based on, with a little Hollywood, shine added to it. it's based on her story, where she, over 10 years ago helped set up one of the first patient clinics that were cannabis friendly to connect patients and doctors in LA. Because, of course, in California, medical cannabis, of course, from my understanding, really budded and began in the Bay Area, the San Francisco Bay Area, and then progressed outward from there.
Yes, it did.
Okay. So I'm not wrong in assuming that. And as far as I understand, she
here's a sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but here's a funny side note on that. I live in the Bay Area, and actually I live in San Rafael. Okay. That's actually where 420 started, because that's the time the kids got out of school.
Yeah, and I found that out not too long ago. That it was at 4:20. That's time to smoke because of school. And the funny thing is, I learned that I think in the last 2 years. It's so interesting to say. And then 2 years before that, I just got turned on to the whole idea of indica, sativa, all these different substrains and stuff like that. So, I mean, I consider myself, even though I've liked cannabis and used cannabis for a long time, I consider myself to be an extreme newcomer. To the industry and to the activist community, and hearing the testimonials, watching "Run from the Cure," which is Rick Simpson's documentary on YouTube, really just made that huge impact. And of course, Dina, I connected with her through Marijuana Heroes, a rating and listing company that I work with out of Denver that I own a percentage of. And she was connected with Heroes, and she kind of, is almost like a mentor. She, kind of gives me a little bit of advice here and there. She helped me up my joint rolling skills, because I was one of those lazy guys from Texas who grew up rolling blunts and never really wanted to make the effort to roll a joint, because it's a different science behind it. So she always gave me a hard time about that, and I'm so digressing off the subject, but
that's okay.
But one of the things that I feel blessed for is the ability to network and associate and learn from people who really I have to thank for being able to be in the industry. I would not be able to do anything in this industry had people like Jack Hare, like Rick Simpson, like Dina, had they not been there, and in much more controversial times. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, and you and I had talked a little bit about this before the show, is I feel the same way. I've been doing this for 6 years, but that's nothing in comparison to the people that you've mentioned, or the people like I mentioned with Paul von Hartman and Roger Christie, who spent 5 years in prison in Hawaii on no real charges at all for starting the cannabis ministry, which they let him have. And I always want to take a moment to really honor these people, because a lot of times, and in fact, I told Matt Shotwell as we were putting Weed Country together, and Matt was the star of that, I said, you need to understand you're at the end of this. You're going to get a lot of glory and a lot of accolades and a lot of probably financial benefit ultimately. But you always need to be humble and realize the sacrifice. And the sacrifice that a lot of people who are still in jail today have made to get this issue to where it is today.
I haven't done jail time for this. I haven't made that kind of sacrifice, and thankfully, like I said, I mean, and like the Drunkers family, who I work closely with them, and Sensi Seeds and the Hemp and Hash Museum, 30 years ago. I mean, what was the view of cannabis in 1985? And to be there, demanding to be taken serious, and putting scientific and a lot of effort into breeding, learning to breed different strains, and that people I truly admire, and I'm just infinitely grateful for. And now, like I'm a newbie. I'm really trying to make, find exactly where the energy needs to be spent. I'm very passionate about the food aspect of this, because the seed has has all 8 amino acids, essential amino acids. It's almost the perfect food. It's one of the most perfect food sources, and like I said before, I think it's one of the top biomass producers on Earth. So that's why I'm so passionate about it. And in the very beginning, I didn't know about any of that when I was working with Rick and having him on the show. I had no idea that you could eat this stuff, and I had no idea you could make bioplastics and biodiesel. I didn't know that you could make
that Ford had built an entire car in '41 that was made entirely out of hemp fiber, which again hemp is cannabis. 400 times stronger than steel, ran on hemp fuel, and that's been talked about a lot. But what I don't think, and Rockefeller went to him and said, if you take this to market, we'll crush you. But what people don't know, even a lot of people who know that story, he had a fleet of 10,000 Model Ts that all ran on hemp fuel, and all of the side panels were made out of hemp. So when he talks about not cutting down the forest, he was actually using it practically to make our first automobiles in this country.
Wow.
And one name I just I feel remiss for not mentioning, and because I mentioned it sort of jokingly in the beginning, one person who sacrificed as much or more for this than anyone is Tommy Chong. Yeah. Tommy, a lot of people don't know outside of the movies and everything, unless you've seen his documentary. Tommy went to jail for 9 months in federal prison for not having weed, but for having a glass shop in Pennsylvania, then got entrapped by the federal government into shipping glass, not weed, across state lines. And he took the rap so his son and his wife wouldn't go to jail for a much longer period of time, just because they wanted to demonize this happy figure in the marijuana movement. So I just wanted to give a nod to Tommy Chong, because I've never done that before, and I really feel remiss for not doing that.
Absolutely. And there was a gentleman who just got out of prison, I think, after 20 years also, and he had a life sentence. It was a huge victory getting him out, too. I'm trying to remember what his name is.
I know who you're talking about.
Jeff Basansky.
Yep.
You know, and it's just like, I just can't wait till they really open the doors and get more of these people out, you know, and start turning back their sentences. You know, I'm really I can't wait for that. And the sacrifices they've made, every inconvenience and every time I bump my head and complain about anything that I have, any obstacle I have in this journey to promote the plan, is very minuscule in comparison to what a lot of these other individuals went through. But, you know, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, this might be a good teaching moment. We'd mentioned in passing indica sativa. You know, and granted, we both admit that we are not the most knowledgeable people in this, but it might be a good teaching moment to illustrate what we do know and help people, because, you know, like you and I were talking, it's like, I knew what indica and sativa were, kind of, but I really didn't know the difference. And I certainly didn't get into any strains. So if you could share some of that, that'd be awesome. Yeah,
definitely. And you know, I'll start really quickly by starting at the very top, as you had mentioned before. This is all goes under the umbrella of cannabis, and that includes industrial hemp, indica, sativa, ruderalis, and you know, of course, industrial hemp is just a very non-psychoactive variety underneath the sativa umbrella. So you have cannabis, then you have 3 substrains. You have your indica, you have sativa, and you have ruderalis. And sativa is more of an equatorial type variety that's found, you know, around warm areas, low latitude areas. And then, of course, indica was discovered, I believe, in the mountains in colder regions. It's characterized by being a more stocky, heavier plant, heavier bud producing plant. And then, of course, indica is taller. Sativa is taller, branchier, has long, thin leaves, and it takes longer to flower and go through its full cycle. And ruderalis is also a smaller plant, and they're learning more about, you know, interbreeding ruderalis with the other 2 strains. But the main difference is, and I refer to sativa when I talk to people who aren't very knowledgeable about it or haven't really had much experience with it, as kind of the Jimi Hendrix strain. You know, it's more of a cerebral, creative. It's the kind that musicians enjoy, artists enjoy. Myself, as a business person, I choose sativa throughout the day rather than indica. That way I don't, you know, I'm not sluggish or I'm not tired. Indica is known for a relaxing effect, where, you know, they refer to it as couch lock. It's a body, it's a sedative kind of effect, and the sativa is more of a, you're thinking, you're kind of in a healing aspect. Sativa, when it comes to medicine, is recommended for topical use rather than internal use, because patients are supposed to rest. So indica is usually the preferred for, like, Rick Simpson oil, for instance, is usually indica.
You know, one interesting thing I learned as I was listening to an interview with Michael Bax, who wrote the book Bacchus, The Cannabis Pharmacy, is there'd been sort of the school of thought that CBD, which is one of the cannabinoids, and there's many, many, many in the plant, that CBD was the thing that sort of relaxed you.
Yeah.
And he says absolutely not. He said he actually uses it as his coffee in the morning. It gets him up, but it doesn't give you jittery. It doesn't give you that caffeine thing. But he said that absolutely it is not the sedative portion of the cannabinoids. And also one other thing, as Robert was describing, the sativa plant being sort of in the jungle, lower level, lower lying areas, and then the indica plant being in higher elevations. I don't know that much about ruderalis, so I won't even speak to that. But what I do want people to understand is this plant will grow almost anywhere it can get its roots into the soil, and it will adapt within a matter of 2 to 3 years to any environment. What this means potentially for the world is that outside of all the things we're talking about, all the things you can do for the plant, well, what does that mean? It means that we can reshape the entire global economic landscape. We can allow impoverished areas in the world to build living, local, sustainable economies where they can get their fiber, they can get their food, they can get their medicine, all from this plant, all while doing tremendous good for the environment.
Yes, and that speaks to that abundance and the surplus. When I was in college, one of my favorite classes I had was economic geography. And the way my professor began the class was he explained to us the evolution of human civilization, how we went from hunters and gatherers to building large civilizations, and how the human body fat percentage going from nomads to where we were growing crops and we had extra food actually affected fertility, and is why we went from a very gradual population increase to a very rapid population increase, because we were able to create that abundance or that surplus. After everybody ate, there was still a little extra food left over. Well, give it to the pregnant lady, or give it to somebody who's still hungry. And cannabis, in my mind, represents that same thing. And of course, I don't want to get too political, but I feel like in where we've achieved great economic feats were because we were able to create economic surplus too. Like in the States, for instance, being such a young country and having all this crazy progress and stuff, I feel like some of that is a result of having the right environment for surplus for a certain amount of time. Of course, now we have central banks and all that good stuff. I don't want to dig too far into that.
Right.
But cannabis, to me, being such a vibrant producer of biomass, having more cellulose than trees, it seems, and being so adaptable, like you said, and growing so quickly in 4 months, you get a harvest. It speaks to me. It's part of that tradition which we used to become great, which made humanity great, made it grow, made us progress so quickly, is that surplus and that abundance. And cannabis, to me, represents that. It represents surplus, it represents abundance, and it represents opportunity, which kind of ties back to, kind of comes full circle back to, with what I've been doing. When I was, 2.5 years ago, I was waiting tables. I didn't have a car. I was sharing a cell phone with my girlfriend and a house. We were sharing everything and didn't have very much. I was a starving activist, is what you could have called me, a starving activist. And applying myself in the cannabis industry, really tying into opportunities that became available because I had originally created this following and social media for activism and for spreading the message that Rick Simpson had. I was able to kind of turn my life around and become financially independent. I have my sister's in my family business now, and she didn't have much going on before that, like in a career path, and now she's right by my side, and we're kind of just waiting on getting different involvement. Like my father, is very interested in being a chiropractor, getting into the industry also. So I'm getting their interest level up. I've been able to like I said, I eat more healthy because I'm able to provide for myself. I've been able to travel, which is kind of shaped my view of the world and of reality here. It's really, I always recommend to everybody. I know people who've never gotten on an airplane before, and to me that's insanity. Just tell people you got to travel. You just got to get out there. It's going to do so much for your point of view and for your perception, your perspective. And all of these things were really, would not have happened had it not been for the budding cannabis industry. No pun intended.
One thing, if I could just interject something, when you talk about us moving from nomads to basically, being hunter-gatherers to cultivars and the agricultural revolution, while yes, it did allow us to provide for ourselves better to a certain extent, it also, I think, gave us a certain sense of arrogance that we were in control of things. And I think it disconnected us from nature and our innate connection to everything. Because even if you look at it from a scientific perspective and you believe in the Big Bang, well, okay, everything came from that one spot. So where did we get disconnected from that one source?
Yes.
Same thing with the planet. It took 4.5 billion years for this planet to evolve to support us and all life on this. So the idea that we could do better was a little bit crazy. Not that it didn't make sense for us in lean times to have that ability, and it certainly served us well. But I also think that the cannabis plant reconnects us with the natural abundance of things.
Yes.
And I think it's something that when you look at the evolution of Western civilization, because there were, in fact, almost every indigenous culture understood this in a way that Western civilization doesn't. They understood our connection to everything. They understood not over-harvesting, even where they too could have their own agriculture. They also knew how to work, for instance, in the Amazon basin, at one point in time, there were 3 million people or more until about 500 years ago. And they lived there for maybe 1,000 years. They were farmers. They managed the land, but they were good stewards. They knew how to create rich topsoil by starting just a certain type of forest fire that created char, which created some of the best topsoil the size of the country of France in the world. When, for some reason, Western culture went down this plan of, we know how to do everything better. We don't need to be connected with anything at all. And I think that the plant brings us back to some sort of semblance of sanity between what we can do and our connection to the internal and external ecosystems we need to thrive and survive.
I think so too. It represents to me a natural mechanism of surplus, of creating surplus, and it almost feels like it's I just can't wait to get this, and it does tie into other things too, like water is a major issue, and I'm a big proponent of air well technology, and integrating the two. Getting an air well and a hemp field established in any community that's stressed. Not just Haiti, but I've been working and networking with some landowners and farmers in Colorado, and in Saguache County, Colorado, namely, they have a very strained economy. It's not Haiti. Okay, but they're out of money still. They're broke, and services are strained. They could use a real capital infusion or a value infusion for that community. And I see this opportunity to have a guilt-free, problem-free source of value just kind of pop up and change the dynamics, change the situation there, kind of bring in some relief. That's kind of the way I view cannabis. So, it's very exciting because the empowerment aspect.
I view it exactly the same way. And like I've talked about, you're doing your work in Haiti. There's tremendous opportunities all over the world. I'm focusing some of my energies on working with Hemp India. One, that's the place that cultivation started. Two, other than us in China, they're one of the world's largest producers, and they're at a real crossroads as to how they move forward as far as their agricultural industry. Do they continue to do vast monoculture farms, or do they go back to more smaller sustainable farming, which a lot of people go, well, we need to do it this way. Well, actually, there was studies done. It was either University of Michigan or Michigan State. I don't remember which one. This was about a little over 10 years ago, where they looked at the best ways for us to feed ourselves. And what they found was our existing farming methodology of, lots of pesticides, big one species planting, that won't even continue to sustain the population we have now. And not that I'm for what I'm going to say next, because I definitely think we need to be wise about our population. But what they found is that if we went to local and sustainable farming, like so many communities are, not only do you feed yourself better, but the planet could support up to 11 billion people.
Yeah,
easily.
When I look at these, I look at, there's this idea of global overpopulation, and I understand regional overpopulation is something that is very real and happening now. You have a large city, you don't have a good movement of services in and out, resources in and out, sewage, water, food, medical services, electricity. And then you have regional overpopulation, and even something like that can be helped with cannabis. Now, the prospect of global overpopulation somewhere down the road, that's something that you have to pay attention to, and what kind of renewable resource can pull us away from digging sludge out of the ground to manage our energy, and how do we actually one of the things that kind of bugs me, it does get away from the subject a little bit, but it's like this whole idea of, we, especially here in Texas, we use a lot of air conditioning out here, and that energy is gotten from oil that we dig out of the ground, and we release hydrocarbons into the air so that we can cool our houses, because they're being showered with endless free energy. And it's just one of the most ironic, laughable things. Yeah, it's laughable. The aliens, I had this hashtag, the aliens are laughing at us, and that has to change. That has to be right. Unfortunately,
I hope it changes, but right now I sort of feel like we're that house on the block when you look at the universe that has all the rusted out, beat up cars in the driveway, and people scratching their bellies and rubbing their crotch, and too many kids and all this stuff, and we're that house that everybody drives by really fast in the universe. And wouldn't it be nice to change that appearance a little bit? Yeah, pretty much. I mean, then some of the practices that we have are downright funny, and others they are funny, are
extremely embarrassing.
It really is. When I sit back the older I get and the more experienced I get, and I really look at what we're doing. It's not a matter of overpopulation. Yes, like I said, we need to be wise, not panic about population. But the problem is consumption. The problem is destruction.
Yeah.
The problem isn't the population. The problem is what we're doing with the population and the resources that we have.
Yeah.
We're not wise about them. We're wasting. If people sit back and they'll throw, oh my God, why is God doing this to us? God isn't doing shit to anybody, pardon my language. You're doing it to yourself. You are making the choice to annihilate yourself. This is the choice that we as a collective are making right now. We don't have to make that, but make no ifs, ands, or buts. No one is doing 95% of the bad things that happen to humanity happen to us because we choose to make them happen.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, you look at it, and you could grab everybody. You could take everybody on the planet, on the face of the earth. You could fit them into 3 or 4 states, and they would have 1,000 square feet homes, front yards, backyards, plenty of space, all kinds of stuff. You could take a few states, or you could take a couple countries in Africa that get a lot of sun. You could farm all the food that the entire world population needs. You cover a couple states with solar panels. You have all the power that the entire world and everybody needs, every single person. I've done calculations of what the land mass of certain states are versus the world population. And, there's no super dire, crazy emergency. But of course, we are increasing. We have to think about, where's our technology? And of course, we have to take a look at our extreme inefficiency. We are extreme. It's almost like we're in a contest to see how inefficient we can be.
I couldn't agree with you more. Listen, we're getting down to about the last 3 minutes of the show, and I want to make sure you have enough time to announce your song and everything. Let's talk, if we can, a couple minutes, encapsulate what you're doing in Haiti and some of the how people can find you and learn more about the work that Robert is doing.
Absolutely. And again, it's been an honor to be on the show. I really appreciate the opportunity. It's just really been a great time. It's flown by fast. So, but basically, yeah, we are in the very beginning phases of getting, now we have some slow motion or in motion hemp projects here in the States, a little something in South Spain that we're working on also. But the one that's really exciting and that's running the fastest is Hemp for Haiti, which is, we have a test crop growing, which is doing extremely well. All the seeds that we planted have sprouted. They're around 2 feet tall now, and they're basically weather or cold hardy, which is funny. The variety we got is cold hardy, but it's still, of course, perfectly viable to grow down there in tropical regions. So our aim will be to present to the government to get support and also apply for an agricultural program grant from USAID, which will allow us to do a large-scale program and hopefully involve planting on government property, government land, and doing some really open source cultivation.
Open source, love that.
Yes. I want to involve, big thing here, which is, something that a whole other subject I want to get into with you at a later time, is making sure that the locals are involved. The people who've been there, the farmers are involved. They're part of the industry that this creates, and that the seeds go to the people. My big goal is the seeds need to go to the people. So.
Yep. Absolutely. So why don't you tell us what song you're going to play us out and why you chose this song? Okay,
so the song is Defiant Order by Birdie Nam Nam, and I have a routine. Every morning I wake up and I listen to a little bit of usually some electronic music, something really high paced. I drink a big glass of water. I used to be a crazy coffee drinker, but I read this stuff about if you drink a glass of water before you do anything in the morning, it gets you woken up, and it really works for me. It gets me started. I get hyper.
I do that.
And I stand in the sun. I drink. It's a sun thing too, because I figured it wakes me up. So I built this routine, and I stand in the sun, drink this big glass of water, and I listen to this song, or there's a couple other songs, but this is one of my favorite ones. It just gets me started, gets me up tempo, ready to get the day done, ready to get everything taken care of, and just a really upbeat, fun song. I wouldn't recommend you listen to it while you're driving, because you might get a speeding ticket, though.
Robert, I want to thank you so much for joining me on the show. Did you have a link that people can go to, or where they can look for you?
I would recommend people just get on Facebook, look up March Against Prohibition. It's kind of one of our central hubs, or look up Drug Possession Laws is another great page on Facebook where we share a lot of information about the changing laws, patient advocacy, and new scientific studies that are coming out.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for being on the show. I truly appreciate all the work you're doing. Your brother in the movement with me. I don't want to use the word fight, because we're building a new table for people to come to. We're not fighting against the existing one, like you and I've talked. Build it and they will come. Thank you for being on the Just Love Show, everyone. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you, WLOR.net, W-Rock, for airing the show. And peace, love, breathe in your abundance, and learn more about cannabis. In fact, educate yourself. This is the great thing about the internet. You have a tool out there that you can learn anything you want. Don't believe anyone's source. Don't believe just what you want to believe. Find out the facts. Find out the truth. This is how we will help to move our species forward, is by becoming much wiser than we are today. Thanks for joining the Just Love Show. Have a good evening.
The views expressed and the opinions given by the individual host and their guests do not necessarily express those of W Rock Radio and its sponsors. All shows are independently owned and broadcast for entertainment purposes only. Readers and listeners are advised that neither W Rock Radio nor its owners and agents shall be held liable for the content of programs. Website content and any audio produced and streamed by W Rock Radio is protected copyright and may not be recorded, rebroadcast, redistributed, or reused without express written permission from W Rock Radio.
2, 3, 4.
Sometimes we need to slow it down. Take a look around and breathe. 'Cause these times go by so very fast. Homes never last. Just breathe. Breathe in, breathe out. Quiet, be still, don't shout. Love is what it's all about. Breathe. Sometimes when you feel you've had enough, living is just too tough. Just breathe. 'Cause you'll regret when these days are past. Your friend just seen your last. Just breathe. Breathe in, breathe out. Quiet, be still, don't shout. Love is what it's all about. Just breathe. just free, just love, just love, just love.
Good day, good